So welcome everybody. It's my great pleasure to introduce P.VanDerSchaaf, who's actually a former student of ours, so Dr. VanDerSchaaf, quite recently. He works for OHSU as a senior project manager, has a very long involvement with PSU and has worked in various project roles at PSU. And he has promised to talk about technology adoption of digital technologies. So welcome, glad to have you here.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. Yeah, as Dr. Yetter mentioned, I did finish my PhD excitedly and very proudly from the ETM department in August, and excited to share a little bit about that research and then some work that's been happening at OHSU with you all. And you know, if Vice President Biden starts to talk and everyone drops off, I'll understand. No offense taken. Hopefully I can squeeze this in before whatever primetime thing he's planning on doing. But I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll kick things off. All right. Awesome. Let me see. Is everyone able to see my screen? I'm not sure. Let me make sure I can see everybody. There we go. Amir, are you able to see?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, great. Awesome. Yeah. So talk a little bit about service innovation through technology, a few case studies. Excited to be here today. Thanks for having me. So the agenda is that we'll talk a little bit about the research I just completed for my dissertation on understanding the determinants of student information technology adoption, and then kind of a small case study vignette on the digital health ramp up at Oregon Health and Science University. Do a little bit of synthesis and love to have some time for discussions. And feel free to chime in either in chat or questions. Sometimes I don't see the chat, so feel free to interrupt, and happy to make this very fluid. A little bit about me. I'm excited to be here today to share with you. I'm energized by changes in organizations that ultimately make it better for customers, patients, students, and users of services and technologies. I'm also energized by my family and being outside. Here's a picture of me on a trip in Washington this summer. As Dr. Yetter mentioned, I work at Oregon Health and Science University, where I'm a project manager on the digital health team, and really working to champion our work on making digital care options available at a variety of mechanisms. And I mentioned I'm a proud alum of the ETM department. I also have a Master's in Public Administration from Portland State and a Bachelor of Science from Ithaca College. So the first case study is determinants of information, student information technology adoption. Here's my committee, which was really, really helpful in guiding me through the research: Dr. Dime, Dr. Ahn, Dr. Basaglu, and Dr. Fountain. And I don't know if we shared slides out, but if people are interested, you can, of course, look at the dissertation, and we can get that link to folks if they wanted to. So some just acknowledgements for those of you who've done it, or if you've done any research project. It takes a lot of effort. A lot of people beyond just me really contributed. So my committee, my former colleagues at Portland State, PSU students who participated in the research, and experts from Portland and across the country, and my family, who's been incredibly supportive, both my immediate family and my extended family as well. And I really hope to try and do justice to everyone's commitment and engagement in the research. So I'm really appreciative of their time. Thank you. So this may look familiar if you're a Portland State student, or if you're working at Portland State. This is a screenshot from a little while ago of my PSU. It's a native mobile application and a website, and it was the unit of analysis for this research. So what we studied, you can get a sense of some of the functionality here around helping students get access to information around finances, their account balances, kind of an aggregation of school tools, academic planning resources, things like that. And so important to this study. The research objective was really to contribute to institutional and societal goals around enhancing service quality in support of undergraduate student outcomes by identifying what really drives adoption of technology in this context. As I mentioned, the unit of analysis was focused on my PSU, focused on providing services for students, and then the target population was undergraduate students at Portland State. So the purpose of the research, higher education institutions are under a lot of stress, I think increasingly so because of COVID, and particularly public, I think, face a lot of budget and performance pressures. But we know that a college degree still creates tremendous value in terms of social mobility, lifetime earnings, and civic engagement, and a more future prepared workforce. But we have some performance gaps, particularly at public institutions that serve diverse students, where 1 in 3 students who enroll in college don't earn a degree, and that really this improving degree attainment is really important, not only for the students and their families who often make huge bets with their lives and finances and enrolling in universities, but also for society at large that's depending on these folks to fill workforce needs and those other societal goals. And I think that really technology can play an important role in service delivery, perhaps even more so now that so much of learning is done remotely, at least for the foreseeable future. And so perhaps the survey was done for this research during the time that COVID was just kind of ramping up, but I think it might have some insights that could help us in this time as well. So in sum, I think that technology can really help to support innovation. So another lens on the research topic, looking at it from a few different lenses. I talked a little bit about some of the social pieces from an economic lens. Universities could look at something like this as a way to help differentiate and create a sustained competitive advantage. From a technical perspective, organizations really have to intently and seriously and intentionally manage their service delivery to enhance the customer experience. And these are just some data points on US goals to improve college attainment. So really that's undergraduates graduating with a 4-year degree. And there's just a lot of potential. We have a lot of students still in the higher ed system, but very low post-secondary credential attainment rates, particularly for subsets of students. So we have some work in front of us. So just a quick summary of the research approach. I did a literature review to identify factors that were found in previous research to influence student information technology adoption. That led to a preliminary research model. Conducted interviews and focus groups to improve the model, conducted a survey of PSU undergraduates, did some statistical analysis using a technique called structural equation modeling, and that led to the results and implications that I'll share today. If you're not familiar, wrong way, there we go. If you're not familiar about Portland State, of course, it's here in Portland, Oregon, 200 degree programs, about 26,000 students. Definitely what many consider the quote new traditional or the non-traditional students, meaning that our students are really diverse. A lot of them are full-time, many are part-time, many of them are first-generation college students, many have children, generally high financial need. And so serving these students is really important for them and for the region as well. And Portland State describes itself as being Portland's public research university and one of the nation's most diverse universities as well. So the work for MyPSU started several years ago when the university embarked on an effort to imagine a new and really designing the best student experience that was possible. And MyPSU was launched as part of this effort and really trying to get to this picture of a happier student on this right side from kind of confused students. And if you've had some experience at Portland State or other places, it can be confusing no matter how much institutions do to try and help smooth pathways for paying bills and working with financial aid. It can be really complicated. And I think universities overall do some really great work. There are opportunities to improve it. And that's one of the reasons why that MyPSU was launched to help improve services for students. So a little bit of context, e-services really is a way to kind of conceive of some of the technology services. There's some information, some recent research that was done a few years ago that looks at enhancements to e-services that really could reduce bureaucratic hassles by creating easier ways to complete business-related tasks. And they do impact persistence. So while my study didn't look at do students who use MyPSU or are heavily engaged in it have better graduation outcomes, there is some research that's emerging that looks at discrete interactions students have had, and the idea of reducing those bureaucratic hassles in online services can really help promote student belonging, which in turn influences persistence. So there's a theoretical framework that this work could that relates to that could help improve persistence. There are a lot of diverse technologies. I'm not going to go through all these, but from ERPs or enterprise resource planning systems to mobile apps to mobile services. And as I mentioned before, the demographics of students are really changing. And that's changed quite significantly in the past decade or so. I talked about a little bit about the gaps that universities have to address. And first-generation college students are really a big focus for many institutions. And at the same time, we know that generally students in higher education, not exclusively, can be more comfortable than older adults in using technology, and smartphone ownership is prolific, as is laptop ownership at this point as well. Again, not for all students, but for a good portion of them. That tends to be true. So the research model that I built and then tested and evaluated stemmed out of the body of work around technology adoption models. Here are some of the ones that are used most often. One of the ones that's cited the most is the technology acceptance model that really looks at perceived usefulness. So how useful is something to use, and perceived ease of use, which is how easy is it to use. I ended up using the unified theory of acceptance and use of technology, which is quite a mouthful, UTAUT. And here's that model on the next slide, or I'll get to that in just a second. So I wanted to just, if you haven't seen a research model before, I wanted just to kind of explain a little bit of what they're like. And so in this case, we have things that are called constructs or factors, and they're ideas or constructs that can't be measured, directly measured, and must be approximately measured by indicators. So for example, in this case, the survey items became indicators that then were organized under these constructs. And they're really important to these models and help to bring kind of aggregate thoughts and ideas together. These arrows or paths between the different constructs imply a causal relationship, although importantly, it's not intended to be a causal or articulate a causal relationship, but to show some type of a relationship between a construct. And taken as a whole, this model reflects understanding of a theory, or kind of how all the pieces fit together. So if we look at the UTAUT model, I'll walk through the definitions in a second, but you can kind of get a sense of behavioral intention. And use behavior is often a dependent variable, and these are often independent variables, where gender, age, experience, and voluntariness of use can be moderators for these relationships. The methods that I used talked about a literature review. I was fortunate to have really great student engagement. We had 17 interviews of 60 minutes each between undergraduates and then professionals, 2 focus groups as well. And, just learned a lot. I think that as a budding researcher, I think it was really just awesome to go through and just see what I started with from the literature and how the participants really, really helped make the research model a lot better. So a lot to learn from others for sure. So here's the research model that I ended up testing, and this reflects feedback during the qualitative work. So performance expectancy, which is basically the idea of how useful is something. Effort expectancy is how easy is something to use. Social influence in this case was I guess it is what it sounds like, people and other kind of social pressures, if you will, that might influence behavioral intention to use MyPSU. Perceived quality had some dimensions that I'll talk about. Self-efficacy and skills. Really, self-efficacy is one's belief in the ability to do something on yourself, and then skills were basic computer and smartphone skills. And then these things kind of facilitating conditions are kind of like things around the technology, in this case, institutional supports, and whether they influenced a student in actually using something, using MyPSU. So here were the hypotheses and some definitions here, just to kind of walk through in more detail. I think the one that I'll highlight is this performance expectancy, the degree to which an individual believes that using a technology will help them overall. We know, and I think that's one of the things that's interesting about having read the literature on technology adoption models, is these constructs are very prevalent. And a lot of the papers actually don't get into the detail on how the indicator variables define the constructs. And me, from a practitioner standpoint, that's actually where it gets really interesting. And I'll talk with you in a few minutes about what I learned. But to me, that's really, because usefulness, usefulness, of course, generally it matters, right? Or how easy is something to use. But I think it's, again, from that practitioner perspective of how research findings can help, I think it really gets into those indicator variables and what we learn from that as well. So we'll get to that in a little bit. So the data collection, as I mentioned before, the data was collected through a survey. It was administered to 8,000 degree-seeking undergraduate students in April through May 2020. And a random sample was drawn from the target population, and it was a web survey. And importantly, which I think helped, I provided a a lottery for cash incentives of Amazon's gift cards, which I think helped incent engagement from students. Here's the sample size and response rate. The sample size ended up being about 1,800 students as a result of kind of taking out non-response bias, and unengaged respondents, with a response rate of 23%, which was really high. I wasn't really sure. I mean, you can see the dates of when this kicked off. April 12th was like right kind of at the height of, we were just like, this pandemic thing, what is it? So I had no idea. I was like, oh my gosh, is no one going to reply? But it ended up, I think maybe people were perhaps more tuned in to their email than they were before. But you can see how the response rate increased over time. And importantly, the response rates are appropriate for using structural equation modeling in terms of the number of respondents in relationship to the number of observed variables in the model and the survey. So we get into the results. I won't go too much into the methodology here for using structural equation modeling, except to say that it helps take a model like I shared before, and it helps evaluate that statistically. It's intended to be an iterative process where you're continually looking for a fit between your theory and ideas and what the data shows. And there's a host of techniques that kind of lead up to the findings for the model. And I'll walk through some of those as well. So how to interpret a model is important before I kind of get into some of the results. The construct and factors, we see those here. Again, we see these relationships that are identified by the arrows. The dotted lines are relationships that weren't found to be significant. Here we have the statistical significance, and then here's the key for that as well. And so these statistics are standardized in many of the results, and they are in what I'll share with you as well from a 0 to 1 scale. And they represent the response of the dependent variable or construct to a 1-unit change in the explanatory variable or construct. So for example, here, if this goes up by 1, this goes up by 0.81. And I mentioned the asterisks. Here we have the variance. And so this explains how much variance the data explains, and it can be translated into a percent. So this would be 55%, 75%, things like that. So here were the final research model results. And we can see that what was interesting and an outlier, I think, in some of the models was the performance expectancy, at least in the analysis I did, wasn't found to be significant, which is kind of interesting. Social influence had a relationship on effort expectancy and behavioral intention. Skills influenced effort expectancy and behavioral intention as well. Perceived quality was found not to be significant. And behavioral intention, understandably, had a large influence on use behavior, and facilitating conditions were found not to be significant. I think one thing that's important to think about in structural equation modeling is there are many models that fit data. This is just one model based on the theory that we set out to examine. And so it's likely there could be other models that are better fits with the data. It's just given the approach that we took, this is where I ended up. So here's, I think, where it starts to get kind of interesting, where we think about what does effort expectancy mean? And again, this is generally found to be how easy something is to use. So we have this ease of use here. In this case, it was learning to operate. How easy is it to learn to operate MyPSU? How accessible is the platform? The prevalence of the mobile app, whether there was value there, the perceived mobile value, being able to use the platform independent of time and location. Here we get into some of the quality pieces that were found to be related to ease of use, system errors, the user interface design, things like that. And then social influence is peer influence, marketing, influence from university employees, and learning about a platform from others. And then skills was basic computing skills and smartphone skills. And then behavioral intention was around intending to use, predicting to use, and planning to use. And then use behavior was captured by some metrics here as self-reported by students. So when we look at evaluating the research models, in addition to the coefficients that I talked about, we also look at the fit of the overall model. And so here are 3 common goodness of fit measures that were used in the research. Here's kind of what the recommended value is. And then here's what the structural model that I showed before, where it ended up. And so on all 3, they were acceptable. And you look for consistency between where you end up in an earlier phase in the analysis, which is called a measurement model. And the measurement model really looks at, are the construct and the indicators a good fit together, and what might need to be changed or dropped. So the model was was solid, at least from these indicators. So what I'll call out here is just the strength of the effect. I think it's pretty interesting. A large effect, efforts influence on behavioral intention, effort expectancies influence there. Immediate effect in terms of social influence and its relationship to behavioral intention. A pretty small effect in skills in terms of behavioral intention to adopt. And a large effect from social influence related to effort expectancy as well. And then a medium effect of skills and effort expectancy. So here's where it gets most interesting for me, I think, both as a researcher and as a practitioner working in the space of trying to make platforms easier for people to use, and in my time at Portland State for students to use. And I think we see that, these things like effort expectancy that I talked through, system errors, ease of use in learning how to operate it, its compatibility with other software platforms and online tools, and then thinking about that and how that translates to practical implications and applications. So here, it sounds kind of basic, but I'm not surprised that the research picked it up in some ways, that making things, intentionally spending time on designing services matters. And I think in some institutions and sectors that are used to using kind of legacy software and IT platforms that weren't really designed around the user, students notice it. There's some data about students seeing that, expressing their dissatisfaction with the lack of easy to use services. And so simple things like looking at the user interface design and thinking intentionally about how all those pieces fit together, from user flows to font choices and information hierarchy, things like that. They really do matter. And I think also access through mobile devices for today's students. Although the Portland State undergraduate body does tend to skew older than many traditional, quote, traditional students, I think that having something on a mobile device, from the research shows, is really important as well. So then we think about social influence, which is, again, peer influence, marketing influence from university employees. And I think really institutions can think about amplifying their efforts that leverage social influence, such as targeted marketing during students' first experiences at university, and encouraging university employees to promote a platform. I could imagine if I would have been an undergraduate student in the beginning of my classes or my time, I would have heard, several different messages from my advisor to faculty to other staff, like, hey, do you know about this thing, MyPSU? You might want to try it out and use it. I could see how that would really influence adoption, and that was borne out in this research too. I think this is an interesting one, the skills factor. When I interviewed the students and leading up to the model, there's definitely a subset of Portland State students who technology isn't super comfortable for them to use. And so, basic technology skills were things I think that some students, not across the board, but definitely some older students really might benefit from. I think PSU does have some courses, but I had to go, took me quite a long time to find them. And so maybe some more offerings of that could help students as well. And then looking at social influence and its influence on ease of use, I think universities could really think about using structured ways to use peers and university employees to walk through the platform. For example, let's say that every time a student called or went to the help desk, they were like, hey, did you know about this thing called MyPSU? Are you interested? I can give you a quick tutorial. I think little things like that could really help students learn how to do it. And I think that's how social influence could really influence ease of use, because you've had that exposure and someone's walked you through it. Oh yeah, I get that. I know how to use it, and probably to be more, might be more engaged in it. And I mentioned this before around these kind of basic support or tutorials for students with basic technology skills. So in sum, I think the implications, I think the research provides insights for university and ed tech sector about how to improve service delivery. It offers leaders and software developers ideas for concrete action to improve IT for students. And it suggests ways, I think, particularly looking at this use case, which is a software platform designed to improve access to services in a context of trying to help students graduate. I think this could provide some insights as well. So in conclusion then, ease of use and social influence really stand out as critical influences for students in adopting a technology. And social influence and students' basic technology skills stand out as determinants of ease of use. And a decent amount of variance was explained in terms of effort expectancy or ease of use, and also for behavioral attention. And then I think from a theoretical perspective, this research question too around to what degree does the UTAUT model predict software adoption? I think it was partially validated. I think what I found is that more complex relationships exist between latent variables. And I think that skills was a new factor that wasn't in the model, or at least in a higher ed context. And I think that's something that could be added. Great. So this is the kind of case study vignette. This is the digital health ramp up at Oregon Health and Science University. So a little bit of context about OHSU, located in Portland as well. Oregon's only academic health center. We care for patients. We educate doctors, nurses, dentists, pharmacists, and other healthcare professionals. We conduct extensive research, including clinical trials. We have about 18,000 employees, about 4,800 students, and we have facilities including a hospital, a children's hospital, partnerships with Hillsborough Medical Center and Adventist Health Portland, and clinics across Oregon. And digital health, which is the focus of what I'll talk about, and this is a definition from the FDA. It's a host of technologies, platforms, software, data, in many ways that really is helping to improve general wellness and in particular medical device applications as well. In particular, I'll focus on the telemedicine part, which is virtual or video visits, and then phone visits in this case. So yeah, here we are. I pulled this last week, I think, from the New York Times. It's just at the end of October, early November. We were talking before we kick things off about where we're going with COVID, and you can see this. And I just bring this up because I think right about the time that we started this ramp up, we were right here. So the technology tools really helped, but still a very big need for patients, at least in an outpatient setting, to be seen remotely. So here's some data from OHSU. What our ramp up looked like. And I think this is just fascinating. So here we were in January 2020, and just keep in mind that graph I showed a few slides ago about the number of COVID cases. And we can see, look at how the volumes drop in April, and look at all the proportions, how they change for video visits and telephone visits, and look at how that is stabilizing. We would never, ever want to have a COVID pandemic have the impact it has on people's lives in so many different ways. From a digital health perspective, I think it's fascinating to see how this crisis really has led to a pretty big shift in consumer comfort with using technology and our organization's capacity to provide those technology options for patients as well. And we've stabilized, in the past few months. Looking at this next chart, you can see that this light gray line here is the percent of digital visits, which is telephone and video, and they're hovering right between 30 and 35% of our overall outpatient volume, and these are the inpatient. And so I think digital health options don't work for all patients, but they definitely do work for some. And I think particularly with our mission to serve patients across the state, there are a lot of folks who can have post-visit follow-ups through video that they maybe couldn't have had prior to the pandemic, that really appreciate not having to travel as far, even if it's only outside of Portland. We get a lot of really positive feedback about that. Again, it doesn't work for all patients, but there's definitely a good chunk of patients and providers that really appreciate these opportunities. This is interesting too. This is the digital health encounters by state. It's just fascinating to see, while we're based here in the Northwest, we've had interactions with people from around the country. And there were some licensing restrictions that were lifted during COVID that enabled providers to do this kind of engagement from folks across the country. So what did the ramp up look like at OHSU? Telephone visits were the first priority and were enabled in 1 week. They were particularly important for vulnerable patients who didn't have access to video or internet. And then we started really ramping up our video visit work. We have 1,200 in providers that were enabled initially for video visits, included a lot of testing and technology with third-party applications. The team really helped to ensure that the transition for providers and patients was as seamless and mirrored an in-person experience as much as possible. So today we have about 6,200 staff who can now deliver patient care through video. and we transitioned to Zoom as the video provider with going live in mid-June. And so we think about, from my experience, my colleagues' experience, I think what were the critical determinants of ramp up for here? Think about leadership and the laser-like focus and priority setting, going back to this visual here, to have this kind of a pivot in modalities within literally weeks was just really, really amazing. And our leadership and teams just totally stepped up, and the leaders did an amazing job of really creating space for the teams to really have that laser-like focus. So we talked about this rapid deployment of resources, enabling hundreds of providers in weeks. And enabling really is working in our EHR Epic system to set up providers and help provide them with training to go ahead and offer those. And also a lot of support for patients and clinics and staff as well. What is it like to prepare a patient? How do we design our workflows so that we're getting patients in and communicated with about how to do a video visit, things like that. So we really emphasized scaling, really tried to keep it as simple as possible. And again, that laser-like focused, I think, helped. We have a lot of really great folks that work at OHSU, and so their talent really made a big difference. And this interoperability of technology platforms, so how do they fit together, was really important. Still, I don't think it's quite as smooth as we'd like it to be, but it's definitely an improvement. And a lot of patient outreach and education, both on and offline touch points to help people be prepared. And just this kind of takeaway is that the necessity really came from the pandemic really driving the urgency for this. So moving into kind of last part of the talk, I think, we think about these two different perspectives and trying to synthesize them together. I think looking from the customer, patient, student, user perspective, at least from the research and students, undergraduate students, ease of use and social influence really stand out. And I think some notes there about specifically how within the context they matter, and basic skills as well. And then from that organizational perspective, I think going through a ramp up like we did, I think, leadership and focus, scale, urgency, resource allocation, and patient centeredness and user experience are some things I think that really stand out. So question mark, and something we could discuss or other questions is this innovation, where we have this kind of culture and values and beliefs that really help to inform the capabilities of an organization, and this obsession around customer experience. Amazon does this all the time, which is why it's so way too easy to go online and click and order things in some ways, but they're clearly obsessed with their customers. And I think that at least in a digital space, in a service space, I think that these three ideas, if they're not, I don't think they're the only ideas, but I think they really are critical to innovation in a service and technology context for users and organizations. So with that, I'll stop sharing my screen and see if there are any questions, comments, discussions. I'd love to hear from you all. I'm happy that I can click back through slides too if we want when we get there.
As always, if you have questions, you can either raise your digital hand or simply type it in the chat. I see Chip is.
Yeah, I just selected to unmute you, Chip.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry about that. Hey, yeah, that's my physical, not digital hand, but sorry about that. Hey, quick question for you. When you started this exercise, was MyPSU already deployed, and did you have any input on the way that it was created?
I did, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I was involved in the project team that saw it as a post-it on the wall and then worked to make it happen. So we used some design, I didn't talk about it, but we used some design thinking, human-centered design approaches to get to the kind of initial vision for it.
Okay, well, I'll say congratulations. It seemed to have worked pretty good. I'm a new user, and it's like I can sort of find my way around, which is unusual for me.
It's been a little while since I've worked on it, but I've got some good colleagues that are really continuing to work to make it easier for students to use. So glad to hear that's your case. That was an easy question, Chip. I was expecting,
So we have a question from Lily. I'm going to read it. Is there a consideration to include a cultural shock type of app for diversity in the model?
Interesting. can you help me understand what cultural shock means?
Let
Lily,
me
that would be great.
let me unmute Lily if I can find her there. Lily, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hello?
Yep,
Yeah.
we can hear you.
We can hear you.
Yes, basically it's very more oriented for international students, which suffer some kind of culture shock when they come to study at PSU or any other institution. And like a place to start, they start with language barriers, or they have a cultural shock related to food, to friends, being away from families. So I wonder if there is an element in your model to reduce this cultural shock when they arrive.
I think, Lily, it was really breaking up, but I think what I understood is looking at cultural shock for international students, and if that's something that could be considered in the model related to diversity. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I think if we, if the focus had been on international students, or would be, I would say that would make a lot of sense as something to think about. I think there are a significant portion of international students at Portland State as well. That didn't come up, but it doesn't mean that it's not something that people would find valuable. Yeah, so I think you make a great comment. And I think that's the interesting thing, right? Designing technology experiences, or really any service experience, is to think about the diversity of users and what's the strategy that an organization uses to design for some needs, but not others, or a way to think about it more universally and thinking about universal design. At some point, though, I think product managers do have to make decisions around what kind of features they include or don't include, and they're really tough choices. I can't speak where the PSU team is now, but I do know that from a few months ago, I think they were considering moving to a different platform that gave them more flexibility, so that they could, I don't know if they would explore this, but do things like, Lily, what you suggested, to give them more flexibility, because it was just really tough. The flip side of it is you try to design for too many things that people want. I think we end up with things that are really difficult to use for everyone. And so it's an important design challenge for teams to think through the diversity ideas and what's that kind of fit for the different audiences that an application is trying to serve. But you make a great point.
Okay, I'm going to unmute Daniel. Next question.
Hi, I am a patient at OHSU, so I have used the video visit and things like that. But there is a simplification in that case, which is that you have one doctor talking to one patient, or one nurse talking to one patient, by opposition to the typical PSU situation, teaching via video, where you have one teacher, but many students. And that's a much more difficult case to solve. Do you have comment?
It's a great point. So one of the reasons why I mentioned that in June, middle of June, we switched to using Zoom is so that we could have more interactions between both patients and providers at OHSU. So I'm not sure when, you shouldn't disclose, but if you had your video visit prior to June 15th, the technology was limiting, and that only, like you said, one patient and one provider could talk. Now we have the ability to bring in interpreters for people to add family members, for multiple providers to join a dialogue with a patient. And it's really expanded our ability to meet patient and provider needs. And particularly from an accessibility standpoint, bringing in language interpreters is something that was really top of mind that we couldn't do before, and we can do now. I think the one-to-many relationship is really great. I mean, I think there's so much that we all can learn from each other. And so I think technology can in some ways be an enabler of that, but sometimes it can be a limiter. So I think, in your classes and things like that, I hope that the faculty that you're working with are using, I don't know, I think Zoom has breakout rooms and things like that, or whatever the technology is that Portland State uses, so that you can have a little bit of more of that dynamic engagement, I think is really positive. But I don't know, Daniel, if you have any other thoughts, but yeah, it's a great question.
No particular thought. Just having tried to do the one-to-many, one of the difficulties in the one-to-many is the teacher has a very hard time checking who wants to ask a question or who is not comfortable with what you are teaching. So by opposition to the one patient, even if you have multiple healthcare providers, they are looking at the patient, and the patient can give a feedback, which is the most important thing in a health situation.
Yeah, those are great points. Interesting, Dr. Anderson. Yeah. Yep. What we find, we were just on a call with Senator Wyden on Friday of last week, a week ago, and he's very interested in care for older patients. And what we heard is for patients who might have mobility challenges or actually cognitive challenges suffering from dementia, that the video visit technology can be really helpful, because it can be really difficult and stressful for patients to move from their place where living to come in for care. And so the technology really enables to help and make it easier, provided they have a little bit of a support network, either where they're living or other people to help them use the technology. But if they can, it sounds like from what those providers were sharing, it's a real help. And I don't know if that's true in your experience at all, but maybe your comment made me think about that.
Oh yeah, well, in my case, I'm also dealing with it from 3,000 miles away.
Oh, wow.
And trying to get the information straight is a challenge that the new technologies can help, as compared to relying strictly on face-to-face, but making it work is challenging.
It is. I spend so much time thinking about how do we optimize and make it easier for patients who have lower comfort with technology. And I don't know, we haven't done anything, I would say, super innovative, and we have some really helpful instructions and videos that a lot of patients use and get to. I think what we hear in some of the comments is that once a patient has done it, and if they do it again, there's kind of some repetition in learning how to operate, and it becomes easier. But there are definitely some steep learning curves for patients who the technology they're not as used to using it as others.
What I've had to do is basically install TeamViewer to take remote control of the desktop 3,000 miles away and turn on Zoom for him, because he can't figure out how to even turn on Zoom.
Yeah. Yep.
So.
I know. I also am helping elderly person in my life, and the technology is really confusing. I think that the designers prioritize, you can do some modifications, but the buttons are small, how the windows come up. I know it can be really difficult. Yeah, that's great that you're able to maybe help a little bit more with the platform you're using to do it remotely.
I have a question. I find it surprising, if I saw that correctly, that performance expectation didn't matter so much, and social influence was so huge. And and so we did so Dr. Weber and Nosha did a study a few years back based on the same theoretical model about remote health monitoring technology adoption among elderly people. And we found the same thing, that it's super important. The social influence is extremely important, but for them, the performance expectation did matter. And so I'm wondering, is this a fluke because of the kind of the power structure when it comes to my PSU? If the university tells you this is how you register for classes, it doesn't matter what performance you expect. This is the way it's done. And any thoughts on that?
That's a great, lots to unpack there. It's a great comment. I think first about why performance expectancy, which is basically, again, how useful something is, didn't come up. I think that, you know, so diving into the weeds a little bit, doing the factor analysis and looking at kind of the distinct factors, there was something going on with some of the data that it just didn't rise to the top as something that was important. And again, I think back to the number of models that one could use. And I think that if I were to do the research again, or to look at the data again and take a very much more exploratory approach, I feel like that usefulness might come up. Because generally, I think what we hear people say is, I can deal with some friction points if it's not easy to use, that's okay, but it really has to be useful for me. That's one of the most important things. So I think that's maybe a little bit of nuance in the model data fit. But I also think too, what's interesting about MyPSU is for everything that's in the platform, there's another way to do it. So basically it's Banner, or BanWeb, which is a student self-service. And so that truly is, you have to go there to use it. And MyPSU is kind of like a way to, I think, kind of aggregate those experiences and make it a little bit easier. Now, I think what we heard is that some students with maybe lower comfort with technology might feel, like you said, that it's like, oh, it's just a thing I have to use and I'm going to use it. And so usefulness doesn't matter. It's just what's there. I think that's a very good critique. And I'm reminded of some conversations too that Dr. Anderson had when I worked at Portland State around, you know, kind of the infrastructure of the university kind of preventing innovation in some ways related to MyPSU. And, you know, I think those are all good critiques and good comments. There's a question about user experience and research about community building.
So the idea is we're doing a virtual potluck dinner on November 21st at student request, in part because people are really feeling a sense of disconnectedness. I mean, and the original ETM potluck grew out of 9/11. I mean, in the aftermath of that, our international students and so many others, just things were fraying. And so, I mean, that was a great sense of community building then. We're in a similar point now where people are stressed out, things are fraying. I mean, there's a lot of stress. And we had a request to say, well, we can't do a physical potluck. We've been doing them for 20 years now, but we can't do it now. Let's do it virtually. And students requested that. And we thought, well, okay, we're worried that people are zoomed out. I mean, too much Zoom overload. I had 8 meetings on different meetings on Zoom on Monday. And so people have that reaction, but yet they want to have a connection with people. So we're trying to figure out how to enable that and do something. Thoughts based on your research and your different communities that you've worked with.
I mean, the one thing that it comes to me is to create space for people to show up how they're comfortable. And so part of that maybe they join when the main courses are being eaten, they have their video on, and later they chose to have it off and they're just interacting via voice or chat. And so I think, you know, there's creating space for people to engage in those different modalities. I know that, you know, like many people, we're all working remotely as well and feeling zoomed out for sure. And I think we just try and create space for people to do that, and people take advantage of it. You know, I know folks that are out, if they're meeting, they're not actively engaged in terms of facilitating, they're doing a little bit some exercising or taking walks or things like that. And I think that helps create community in a different way. But yeah, I don't know. It's been a little while, but I saw some research a few months ago and it was, maybe some even know it better than me, that was basically like, you know, repeated exposure to video because of the time lag really influences our cognitive load. It's really tiring. And it's not, I think when we were all just like, oh my gosh, we're so tired. It was, you know, often because we were adjusting to like that lag that you don't have in person. But yeah, I don't know. I'm curious to see what other things. It's a good question. Yeah.
Okay, so I see there are private messages to me about actually the course requirements. I don't think that's for the general audience. I'm happy to stay on for a little longer after this call for everybody who has questions about the grad seminar, but are there any questions for our speaker? I don't want to cut anybody short. Yeah, Khaled.
Sure.
So I think you're still.
I'm overreacting here.
Oh, sorry.
Getting too quick on my mute button. My question was about change. I may have missed specifically because the apps and all the portals that we access tend to change often because of requirements or improvements. And did your research specifically address that or take a look at that? How different responders, different age groups, for example, react to change in these portals?
It didn't. That'd be an interesting line of inquiry for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I didn't look at it. I think what comes out for me a little bit is, so there's some research around chatbots. And so I guess what I hear from where I go with your question a little bit is I didn't study it, but what I'm wondering about is there's some research on how technology actually could be an enabler for students from marginalized communities, perhaps, or vulnerable populations, particularly because they may not have access to people who have gone to college and know how to ask questions or even what questions to ask. And so in some ways, I think that technology seems to have some ability for some students to help level the playing field. There was some peer-reviewed, what I'm talking about, it's actually, I think my sister's on the call, but where she works at Georgia State, they've done some really rigorous studying of the chatbot that they've used to help first-year students as they've started. And they found that first-generation college students disproportionately benefited from using the chatbot technology. And many of their questions, I think, were around financial aid because it's really complicated and they may not have had someone to ask. So I didn't study what you asked about, but it reminds me of I think there are different user groups that might benefit. And in my survey responses, I had a larger proportion of students who with high financial need replied to the survey. And that could be because I offered incentive. I mean, incentive there weren't like lots and lots of them. But I think it's probably more that, and I don't know how to study it. Or there's some data, I guess, but that maybe students who have more barriers, that technology for some of them can really be an enabler and a helper.
Just some ideas come to mind, like a new version. People sometimes they like their favorite service, and they communicate and the social interaction. They communicate to other students, hey, did you check that new feature or new way of doing things? And that can influence the adoption in better way, but also be obstacle for somebody else who gets stuck with a changed interface or something.
Yeah,
thanks. I was commenting on the lag that we should get used to, is that if some of our family will move to Mars, then we have to deal with this lag in a serious way. So we better get ready for that.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like we have any more questions. And thank you so much. I would like to thank our speaker. Thank you for spending the Friday afternoon with us on an exciting day like today. And thank you for a wonderful talk. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to everyone for the great questions and your engagement, and I hope it was helpful. Thank you.